This next way of forming the fire egg is actually a very, very quick and fairly simple method that can be used when you're out camping. The supplies are fairly simple. You need a canning jar, or if you lack a canning jar, you could use an open-ended can, anything that's metal or glass, but you need some way of making a seal around the top. So if you don't have a screw-down lid, you could stretch the space blanket over the top of it and then use butter or something to make a seal and twist tie, or string to make it sealed. You need a little corner that you've taken off of a space blanket, and you need some way of getting that jar warmer than the air that's around you. For that reason, this works far better in cold temperatures than it does during summer. For the purpose of this illustration, I'm just using a little bit of warm water, although you could use any warm fluid that a scout happened to carry around with him at all times if it's not been already used to put out a fire. The warm liquid goes into the jar. You want to swirl that around so it both warms the jar and warms the air inside the jar. That's the important part, because what we want to do is get the jar warmer than the surrounding air, and then we're going to let that cool down after you've sealed the top, and that will form a vacuum inside the jar. Okay, that's nice and warm. I'm actually going to pour most of that out except just a little bit. Quickly cover that with our space blanket. I'm going to secure that down with the ring. And then just let it cool. As it cools, you see it draws that space blanket down tight and stretches it into a very reflective surface. That reflective surface is going to be good enough to reflect the sun's rays and allow you to start a fire. Alright, here's our parabolic reflector made out of a piece of space blanket in a jar. We're going to line that up with the sun by looking at the shadow and trying to adjust that until we get the smallest possible shadow for it. We know it's pointing to the sun. And then you'll have to experiment and find just, well, there it is. There's our focal point, and our tinder's off and smoking. Fresnel lens. It works like a magnifying lens, only instead of using a curved surface, it uses a series of very small grooves cut into the plastic or etched in the plastic to bend the light's rays. This is similar to what you all have who came to the class today. Use it just like a magnifying lens. You turn it parallel to the sun, then you adjust it to focus that down. You can see how that doesn't take long at all to get your ember going. Alright, this is a Fresnel lens like the one we looked at earlier, only instead of focusing the sun's rays down to a point, this focuses them down to a line. A lens this size can actually melt concrete if you get a good bright midday sun. Gets up hot enough that it'll burn through quite a few things. This is a very ingenious way of creating a fire, which is not modern at all. In fact, it was in use when we first came here to colonize the Americas. In its simplest form, it consists of nothing but a hollow tube with a very smooth surface on the inside of the tube that's plugged at one end. On the other end you have a piston or a shaft. You have some sort of gasket which is going to allow you to make a good seal against the inside of this shaft. And you have something that will hold a tinder, something that can be ignited. If you have ever sprayed a spray can for very long, you've noticed that the can begins to get cool. Air, when it goes from a compressed state to a normal pressure, cools down. When you take air at normal pressure and then put it under higher pressure, it heats up. In this case, we're trying to achieve temperatures of around 400 degrees centigrade, hot enough that it will ignite charred cotton, which is what I'm going to use as the tinder. And then I'm going to load this with a little charred cotton. Once you have your tinder in place and some lubricant around the gasket, all you do is you fit it into the end of that seal, fit it firmly. There you go, there's the ember to transfer into your bark nest to create the fire. Okay, now this next method is one of the hardest ones to come up with the fire egg, but it involves nothing but what you've got with you if you've got a pair of shoes and a knife. So there's no other special equipment required. It's called a fire bow, and there's several different principles. One is what's called the base plate. This is the thing that's going to go against the ground, and this is where you're going to be turning your spindle or grinding your spindle onto. This is the spindle. It works best if the spindle is made of a softer wood than your base plate. So a hard wood for the base plate, a soft wood for the spindle. In general terms, that means you want to use wood from a tree that sheds its leaves to make the base plate, and from an evergreen to make the spindle. This is called your cap. I've made this one out of wood. You can also make it out of stone, or you can make it out of bone. Basically, it's what you're going to hold in your hand, and it needs a notch in the bottom of it to accept your spindle. Your spindle's going to glide across the top here at the same time that the bottom part of it's spinning against your base plate. The last part of our assembly is the bow. And the bow is what you're going to use to drive that spindle back and forth. You see I've got a string here, and when I do this, I'm going to take and twist the spindle into the bowstring like that, so that it will twist around the spindle. That way when I draw the bow back and forth, the spindle will turn.
Grab your spindle and the cord. And you put your foot on the fireboard, put all your weight on it, grab your rock, and put all your weight on that spindle, and then just like
there's the smoke, and there's your ember.
And there's your ember. After you spin your spindle about a good 30 seconds, really fast and really hard with a lot of down pressure, it'll start smoking, and you just let the wind carry it, and it'll start slowly smoking, and the rest of the shavings of the wood will catch on fire, and you'll have a nice fatty ember.
There's got that top cap that's acting as a pivot for the top of the spindle. The bottom of the spindle is burning in a new hole in the board right now. He's got a rich supply of that black dust. As you can see, it's smoking. He's using the air to help that develop a glowing ember. Now he's using a small stick to transfer that ember over into his bark nest.